Sorry about that. I think we're back.
Hi.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent, great. So we'll begin. Thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to begin. All of you have obviously had an opportunity to preview the webinar or the overview that I provided last month and of the assessment. And I just want to go through the fact that and make the point that it is not a test. This is an assessment, and it is assessment to help us understand where we are going with our learners. So what we've done is we've updated the current assessment tool that we were provided in 2003 and have made amendments to suit students that we have currently in the system in primary to grade 12. I want to go through the three components: the oral language component, literacy, and first language. The oral, from what I can understand, that most people feel comfortable with the oral language, with the language inventory, the pictorial. Part 1, you can see that we added the extra picture for part 2 for our older students, which is, I'm just going to show that to you, pictorial assessment part 2. Has everyone had an opportunity to take a look at this? Okay, great. Have you been able to use it with any of your students? It follows the same process as the original one, where you're able to interact and with the students to obtain as much information as you can. So it gives you some options here with the actual assessment. So we'll go back to the actual webinar. Does anyone have any questions on that pictorial? Pictorial part 1, second selection. I think we're okay with the pictorial. Okay, let's move along. So I just want to before we go into the actual assessment, let's go over the EAL student profile and language survey and the L1 optional writing sample. I think this is, there may be some questions around this. If you preview the actual file that we had here, which highlights this, this becomes a very important start to finding out information about our students. You have to appreciate our students have never been in the English school system here in Canada prior to arrival, and sometimes the language background form provides information that helps us understand who our learners are. And I want to make sure that we understand, especially with migratory patterns lately in the last decade or so, people are living in many more different countries. It's very common for us to have children who have been born in one country and raised in another and educated in another throughout the course prior to arriving in Canada or in Halifax here anyway. So we have just recently received children who may have been from India, but they were educated in Italy, speaking Italian, speaking Hindi upon arrival, and English would be their third language. Very common to see different migratory patterns here. So during that, getting that glimpse of a student language background form is very important. So we acknowledge what languages and what educational background those students have. Have you been using a student language background form of any kind to figure out what kinds of languages or exposures, things that students have been studying? I'm going to ask that question from the No. This is the starting point. This is your starting point. And very important because many of our students have also studied other languages if they have been in school. Even our refugee children who may be arriving, they may have been speaking Arabic, in their home country, and due to displacement, may have gone to Turkey, so start to learn Turkish prior to arrival to Canada. That's very important. And if they went to Lebanon, perhaps they may have been speaking French upon arrival. That's a missed opportunity if we don't understand that some of their learning might have happened in French. So those kinds of, and there are no assumptions because, like I said, many different, the world is changing and the context is different. So understanding what their home background is very important. Additionally, parents have commitments. I met a child whose father was speaking Persian, the mother speaking Russian, the little one was speaking English upon arrival to school, and they were registering her for French immersion. Again, no assumptions. So this language background form that our teachers use here in Halifax helps us get a sense of who our learners are. And it is a way to open up communication between home and school as well. And so parents get to share some information. In the case of parents maybe not speaking English upon arrival at school, we will sometimes have our YMC support workers help translate this information, communicate this, and they will help fill out the forms as well. Does anyone have any questions about the student language background form and the importance of that for understanding who our learners are in our classrooms today? I see John said we had Syrian and South Korean. Yeah, yeah, very important. So no assumptions. We don't know the migratory patterns. Okay, good. So I would, again, when we go through this whole assessment tool, I want you to understand we're gathering information every step of the way. It is not one test. It is a we're compiling all this information about our learners so we can best support them in the classrooms as they continue on their learning journeys here in Canada. Okay. If you have no other questions, I'm going to continue and go back to the actual assessment. There it is.
Okay.
Okay, everyone's okay. Great. So let's go now to the L1 optional writing. I inserted it here purposefully because we're talking about language, but at any point you can do the L1 writing sample. The L1 writing sample, as you know, you can turn to your page 24 in the literacy component, and it has approximately 20 different topics that you can use to help students elicit ideas. But what's most important about this are the observations that you are going to be making while the student is writing in their first language. You may not understand a word that that student is writing, but it is about the observations that you are making while the student is writing. So this can include the pre-writing phase. Does the student want to discuss any of the topics with you? Are you using Google Translate to communicate what they're going to be writing about? So how are you going to communicate what you want them to say? This is a part of the observations. If you want to have them write about their trip to Canada, being on an airplane, leaving their country to come to Halifax or to Nova Scotia, we want to make sure that they understand, that they know what the topic is and how are you communicating that. So that's the pre-writing phase. And you can try to do that through Google Translate if you don't speak the same language. If they're speaking a little English, you can try that in English. But the point here is to try to get them to think about their writing that they are about to encounter. During the writing phase, I want you to start asking questions like, does the student write confidently? Are they writing quickly? Are they rereading while they're writing? Are they correcting any errors that you may see? This could happen for a child who's 6 or 7, all the way up to someone in high school. What we're trying to do is you're making these observations through the writing process. Are they using resources? Maybe are they taking out their phone to translate something or think of a word that they'd like to write in their L1? Are they using illustrations perhaps and diagrams to add detail? When they write in their first language, are they trying to translate things for you in English? These are all observable features of that student's understanding of how to work with language. And the more control they have of their first language, the more control they will have as they acquire their additional language. Very important aspects of understanding our learners. Do they write quickly to get their ideas down first? Are they writing more slowly so that it is error-free? Is the font large, depending on their age, obviously, or is it very concise and neat? Even though you may not understand the script, the letters, you are able to see that they have control of what they are trying to say with their writing instrument, be it a pen or a pencil. So handwriting, is it legible? Is it clear for the student? So those are the kinds of things and questions that you would be observing during the L1 writing sample. Does that make sense to you as a teacher who would be wanting to see something that a student is writing? And more importantly, you're sending a message to the student. What you are saying is that you value that student's understanding and learning in another language. You, as the English as an additional language teacher, understand, although they may not, they are acquiring English, it does not diminish anything that they are bringing to you to school today. So that value, do not underestimate the importance of that to that student and the message that you are sending to that learner. And as we continue down the assessment, you will see that the students will be receptive to you and you will be able to obtain more information about your learner as we continue. So if you do not have any other questions about L1, then we can proceed. If you'd like to ask me some questions at this point, please ask me. Or if that's clear.
You could also use their microphones if they want to.
If you want to have a microphone, you can certainly ask as well. Everyone's good?
Yes, I'm good.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So these are this is an important phase I know teachers are not comfortable with often. And what I will say is once the writing sample is completed, and you have to pace it for the age appropriateness of the child. So if they're in elementary, a 10-minute writing sample. If they're a little bit older, 15 minutes, upwards of 20 minutes. We want to make sure that it's not a long period of time, but enough for them to generate some ideas on paper that you can make some observations. At some point, once the student leaves, you can also try and put into Google Translate. But that's another whole aspect, a piece of training. If you're not familiar with Google Translate, we can look at that as well, if you need to have someone translate it for you. But the purpose here is about observing their L1 writing habits. All right, so let's move to the next one then. So we're already finishing to number 1. I want to go into number 2 here, where it talks about the oral language inventory, which says used as necessary. If you have the background, language profile background, you have completed an L1 assessment, and you feel it's necessary to start with the oral language inventory of individual words, you can do so. But if you're having communication conversation with students in English, basic English, then you may not feel that it's necessary. This is an option. You don't have to go through every word and identify, chicken and other items that are on those individual lists. This is more of a backup for you to find out if any specific words that may have been learned along the way, but by no means is it necessary. The pictorial assessment 1 is where you want to focus, because this is where we're doing our original communication. So it goes back to the 2 pictures that are available to you. That's the one with the airport or the new one with the students being in the cafeteria. This pictorial allows you to be able to have this conversation, discussion between yourself and the student and document that. Is everyone okay with the understanding of how to mark that assessment with complete sentences or partial sentences or 0 for no responses or incorrect responses? Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Yes? Jennifer's okay? I see responses here, so everyone is okay with that. What the oral assessment part 2, which is your final questions around past, present, and future tenses, this is another additional piece of information that you can get to support your understanding of where that student is orally in English at the starting point upon arrival. So if you're good with that, that's our oral. I thought that was going to be a rather quick review because this has been something that we've had for a much longer period of time, except for the added pictorial of the cafeteria. All right, so let's then move to the literacy. So the literacy was completely replaced, as you can see, with the Fontes and Pinnell. And the Fontes and Pinnell, obviously, 3rd edition kits 1 and 2. They replaced both components of the reading and the writing because it's connected. So we are asking students to read and write about what they are reading. The purpose of the reasoning behind the Fontes and Pinnell is that, first of all, it is EAL user-friendly. It is speaking the same language as the classroom teacher. So if you've been a classroom teacher, this is nothing new to you. These are running records, as we've often referred them to. It is a starting point for understanding where our students are going. Again, we're looking at formative assessment. We're just getting a snapshot picture of where that learner is in their reading. Prior to understanding and using those kits, but with our new arrivals, we often have to figure out which book are we going to get them to read. So in order to do that, you would have to try to do a reading list, a decoding list, such as the Slauson or the ones provided by Fontes and Pinnell. I'm just going to go here. Skipping this. Does anyone have any questions around the Slauson? And the reason I ask that is the purpose of it is just decoding. It's not about any meaning. The student does not have to understand the word as long as they can break those words down, especially as we get into lists 3 and 4 and 5, where they're monosyllabic words. We're making sure that they understand their prefixes, their endings on words, things like that, that they actually are not struggling with them. With the Slauson in particular, where any list that would have more than 5 errors would obviously be very difficult for the learner, so that would not be a list or a targeted area for that reading. So you want to go back one. But usually you can try to gauge, based on the oral, based on the L1 writing sample, where you think that students should start reading those lists of words. Any questions with that? We're good? No? So are you feeling comfortable figuring out what reading level to give to a newcomer in English? And if not, please let me know. Good. We heard back from Jennifer, Millie, John, Crystal. Timing. Interestingly, for our students and for our teacher purposes, upon arrival, we assess all our learners within a day or 2 of arrival. Although they're trying to settle, they're still, just so that we have an understanding within the first week, it's a very good idea to have that assessment done. Just to give us an idea of what they are able and capable of doing in the classroom in English. Otherwise, we're just guessing. Absolutely. This is critical for the teacher. The classroom teacher, we know there are 2 components to reading, and one is decoding, the other is comprehension. So this segue of the Slauson or the other word list provided by Fontes and Pinnell, all they do is they direct us in the direction of selecting a starting point for that book, that level book that then we may be sharing with that learner to see where they are actually in their reading. And that teacher needs to know that. Okay. We have large caseloads here, and Kate Brighton had teachers with them all in the first few weeks after the arrival. Yeah, so one of the things that we do, and most of our teachers have, some of our teachers have So we have schools, which I would say are larger volumes of newcomers who arrive on a regular basis. And within the context of their schedule, they have an EAL rotating assessment period block, because they are guaranteed to be getting children coming in on a regular basis. And if they're not assessing a new arrival, they are working in a classroom. So it's identified right up front in their schedule that this is an assessment block. If they're on a circuit, they would be going to that school, or they would be going to a particular classroom, and that's all communicated. So it does not disrupt the overall schedule, but this is the reality of EAL teachers and working with newcomer children. They're arriving any day of every week throughout the year. So in order to support that, very good question, our teachers would have to just have that built into their schedules. I'm following along, just do not have the ability to talk. Owen can't talk. We have a little bit of a glitch here.
If you look in the top left corner of your screen, Owen, you'll see a microphone icon. And if you click that, it will turn green. And that should prompt a wizard to come up if your microphone is not set up. But you do have to have a microphone connected to your computer one way or another. Hopefully the chat box can suffice if you can't get it to work.
I also want to answer Crystal's question around how do our teachers fit them all in. They will start with all their new arrivals assessment, if you're talking about September in particular, but throughout the year. If at any point there's an influx, all teachers will then start supporting the assessments of one another. So we will coordinate more assessments if we need as backup support. However, most teachers want to manage to do their own individual assessments because they're working with their learners, so they are able to fit all those in. The reality is, the faster and the more you do the assessment overall, and the more comfortable you are with all the components, the faster you'll become, and you're able to turn it around rather quickly.
Okay.
All right. So the key here is that, again, as with anything that you're starting that's brand new, that you're not comfortable, you're going to be slower. I always explain that to new teachers. That's the reality. But with practice, and the more you do it, and in Halifax we have lots and lots of practice, the teachers actually get quicker and quicker at it. So to be able to meet those requirements, because that's the reality here, is that new arrivals are coming all the time. And so we have to expect that. It's not that they come in September and that's it. We're not receiving any more. Yeah. So flexible is key in this job of working with newcomers. And that means that as EAL teachers, we have to be responsive to all new arrivals. And we don't want to leave any of our new arrivals sitting in classrooms with classroom teachers not knowing who their learners are as soon as possible upon arrival. Knowing full well, obviously, that within the first week that we will get to that assessment. So everyone is on the same page. It's supportive of everyone. All right. There are no other questions around the SLOSN or the assessment forms that are found. Are you comfortable with that? No mic. Owen has no mic. All right. Sorry, Owen. Owen doesn't have a mic. Okay. If you have any questions, Owen, you can always write them in the chat box. Or we can try to answer them at a later point. Great. All right. Let's go to the next one. Great. Being on the page, same page. This is why EAL teachers in Halifax are working in collaboration in a co-teaching model of support, because we are all focused. You have to understand there's only one curriculum, one provincial curriculum, and we're all working towards those outcomes. So the EAL teacher is working alongside, and doing that, we all have to understand where our learners are with their reading and to make sure that they're moving forward. If you can look at the reading and writing selection on the slide here, you'll see for our EAL purposes, you have the different levels for reading specifically. It's emergent, P1. So if you look at the Fontes and Pinnell lettering system, you will see it's basically A to Z. And what you will see is a breakdown. I would suggest this is the Fontes and Pinnell system. Some of the school centers for education may have adjusted them to your center. So I would suggest talking to your literacy people to see exactly where they fall with the Fontes and Pinnell system. But basically, you know, you have your lettering system A to N and then L to Z, and they cover those 4 areas. So basically, as the students are reading through their levels, you can understand which stage of reading development they're at. Yes, especially at the junior high and high school level. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So what we have to understand that we may have a transitional reader or an early reader at the junior high or high school level who's just arrived, and they have the content that's being presented in their classroom. It does not take away while they're acquiring their English and they're developing their English reading skills that we give them. We have to make sure that they have comprehensible input at that level, but that we don't change the content in order to meet those outcomes. So regardless of the proficiency scale that they are at, we're making sure that the students are keeping up with meeting those outcomes. Does anyone have any questions on selecting text and going through the process of sharing and doing a reading, an oral, a read aloud with that student? I want to make sure that you understand that this is not a secret. So when you give someone a book, we want to make sure that we start a conversation. We look at the cover, and you start that process of any prior background knowledge. If you notice, the focus is on non-fiction text. And the reason for that is very simple. If we have something that's very tangible, we have something that we can actually communicate about. Sometimes our fiction stories in English are very cultural, and we knowing full well that our students are new arrivals to Canada, they may not have that background knowledge, which would be difficult to determine upon arrival. So therefore, we're focusing on nonfiction. Even though they may not have a lot of prior knowledge on some of the items, they could at least have that conversation or understanding of what that is. Does that help? Does that help with understanding of why we would use nonfiction?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
this is why. So that's
Makes sense. Yeah.
now. If you were working with Canadian children in the Canadian school system, the teacher would be picking a fiction, fiction level F or fiction level H. But we would be picking for our EAL students nonfiction text. Okay? And that will help, those concrete examples are a better way to have that conversation with your new arrival because it's something that they can understand. Okay. And let's move to the next. If no other questions around this. We already talked about our L1 writing sample and being able to translate. I think it's very important during this assessment. I'm not sure how familiar you are with translanguaging, but it's okay for students to use their first language as needed. And we want to know if they're using their first language for understanding. And sometimes in the beginning stages, they have to make sense of something in their first language. And so when it comes to things that they may need and understand, so even when you think about the oral assessment, when you're showing the pictures, if that student or that child is identifying book and they don't know the word book in English, but they actually know the word book in their first language, that's a good thing. And so if they can't identify in English, you can always ask Arabic, and they will. And in Arabic is Arabi. So you would say, and they will be able to tell you what the word is for that diagram or that picture. So I think it's very important to not forget and discount and ignore the child's first language during this assessment because we're not going to get the full picture of the child otherwise. So it is an English assessment, but it is overall language assessment of our student. And the interesting interesting thing is once you start collecting all these little pieces, you're able to paint a very good picture for that teacher because you have the luxury of being with that student in the situation of obtaining this information. You need to be able to share and communicate that with that teacher, especially if they want to know where they are going with this learner. Which takes us to our assessment descriptors. If you look at the assessment descriptors, we can call it what we can name things, many different things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In Halifax, we have new to English, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and fluent. And I think that keeping the language, again, very clear and understanding of how our learners are acquiring skills in English throughout this process. This assessment that you are doing is your benchmark. It's a starting point. And this is where we need to know and ensure that our student is moving forward. So once we've compiled all the information, we're trying to make as you gather all this evidence, you're making a judgment as to where that student is in their listening, speaking, and reading and writing, and therefore communicating that to the classroom teacher. Does anyone have any questions about the assessment descriptors? It's okay. Good. Again, communication is key. So you have all this information in front of you now. And how are you going to communicate that to the classroom teacher? Because remember, that student is in the classroom with those teachers on a daily basis. And therefore, they need this understanding and strategies on how to work with those learners. So we developed a tool that we use here. You could have a conversation with them to show them and make some points or highlight some of those things that you have found in the assessment process, during the assessment process, and share that. Communication, do not underestimate the time that you need to spend. Often we figure out and we try to focus on the student, but do not forget the classroom teacher. So this ensures that the classroom teacher has this at their hands and fingertips. Is that okay? Does everyone agree that communicating this about the assessment is very important to teachers? Okay. Once you have finished that assessment, that starts your conversation. So if you look at the classroom teacher feedback response, I'm going to bring this up over here and zoom in a little bit. Zoom in. So what happens now is this tool usually utilized around the intermediate level where students are starting to create some independence. So if you have a new arrival and they're coming out as, intermediate and they're moving towards independence, this is something that you would be utilizing to make sure that they get to the point. This is not something that you would implement right away necessarily, but something that we would use along the way to help support and understand that growth is happening for that learner. Does anyone have any questions about this tool and why we would use it? For example, student takes personal responsibility for language learning in the classroom setting. So this is when you're not here. This is what the classroom teacher is observing, and they are able to respond to you around what the student is doing or perhaps not doing. And we would include the student in the conversation as well, but this would be at the intermediate level. As you can see, the student will apply listening strategies to improve comprehension of academic language. So are they asking the teacher for repetition or clarification? Are they checking comprehension through varying resources? Maybe they're using an iPad. Are they, are they asking their peers? Are they asking the teacher? Those are the kinds of things we want to see. We want to develop independent language learners. And we want to get them to the point that they are comfortably functioning in that classroom setting. So if you set up the student and the learner, but communicating that with the teacher, and then following through with that, you're able to see the growth and create independence for that student in that classroom. So the assessment is more, it's not a test. It is a starting point for where our learners are and where we're going to be moving them to. Does anyone have any questions on the feedback response? Once again, you would have to have that original
Sonja, can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I just wonder.
Now I can.
It's Millie.
Yeah.
When you were talking about that checklist, the checklist, is it done between the EAL teacher and the classroom teacher, like the feedback checklist? Like, is it something that the teacher has in the classroom when you're not there, or is it something that you do together, you discuss?
So hold on one moment. Here, we're trying to increase the volume. What it is if your student is coming out at an intermediate level, you may wish to give the feedback response checklist to the classroom teacher, and the classroom teacher would be filling this out during that time when you're not there. And it's a communication, so where you're initially providing them information of where they are upon arrival, this is for the classroom teacher to start communicating to you where they see their learners. Does that make sense?
All right. It makes sense. Thank you.
Yes. So it's a communication tool. I think the most important part is that as EAL teachers, you're not the only one teaching here English. Everyone is. So we want to make sure that our teachers are a part of this process and that they are included. And so by doing that, it's a shared responsibility. And EAL teachers working in unison with classroom teachers, it just creates that opening and that partnership going back and forth.
Okay, thank you.
And once the classroom teacher signs off on the classroom feedback response, let's just say they're all on par, they're feeling the student is doing extremely well in their classroom, EAL teachers still may wish to hold on to the student until they see, a little path. It's not just what the classroom teacher is seeing, it is what the EAL teacher is seeing as well. So you may wish to continue, or you may say that they're independent at this point for grade level, and then you may wish to just, keep them at independent for a term or a semester. But at this point, it is it's not just you. All the information is sitting with you. It is that balance between the classroom teacher and you.
Okay.
I'm just going to skip over. So that is an overview of the assessment and the rationale behind the different pieces. And the purpose of it is to be able to work with our learners and support them in their language growth and start collecting evidence. So we have a starting point, and as we continue, we can, especially with our reading levels, which are in line with where the classroom teachers are. Often classroom teachers, as they are starting to prepare for report cards, they may wish to do updated running records for their students. The beauty of this is that EAL teachers can do that for them. And all of a sudden, it lightens the classroom teacher's load. When you have the EAL teacher conducting the running records for the classroom teacher, and then they're using that as they move forward, especially when it comes to assessment. Because remember, the provincial outcomes are the curriculum that we're using in whatever subject, and we're supporting that assessment process. And it's not just that at the end, it's that growth that we're seeing over time. So this is what we're doing here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
At this point, I'm going to open it up to you. If you have any other additional questions that you may have, please ask at this time. So I know that many are, how many of you are using running records currently, or the Fontes of Manel currently with your students? Can you just give me a sign? Owen, thank you. Very important information. Thank you, Millie. Great. Jennifer, Crystal, excellent. Now you're on the same page with teachers. And so when it comes to next time and seeing the growth that needs to happen, you're working together on that. And I will tell you that classroom teachers really appreciate EAL teachers that much more when those kinds of things are being done. But from our purpose, from a language assessment and a literacy assessment point of view, it supports growth over time. The interesting thing with our language learners, especially if the more literate and the stronger they are in their first language, the stronger they'll be in their additional language, they actually can move levels quite rapidly, especially as they have more control of their first language. And sometimes classroom teachers are very much amazed at how many gains they can make over, a 6-month period. So you'll see, so having that EAL teacher affirm that is very good. Should we set reading or writing goal? You have to remember that all language, as an EAL teacher, we're focusing on all literacy is built on oral. And so we want to have a balance, oral and language, within the context of the classroom. So we want to have students talking in their classrooms as they're improving their oral proficiency and their literacy skills at the exact same time. It's not one over the other, it's all of it together. Any other questions? Thanks, Owen. Great. Yes, actually now would be a great time to start using it. Teachers are starting to get ready probably in November for getting prepared for the report cards, especially at the elementary and junior high level. So having this concrete information about their reading, especially if you've taken a snapshot at the beginning and then towards November, you'll have some idea of gains that are made and you'll be able to respond to that in context of what they're learning in their classroom. So very important as we teach language through the content areas. Any other questions? Do you feel comfortable and confident in doing this? Please understand it takes practice, no different than language. We're asking our language learners, if you continue and start doing this, you'll become more comfortable. And as you become more comfortable, it becomes quicker. I know it looks very cumbersome that you're looking at pulling, but you have to remember we're talking about children who, if we just focused on English, we didn't look at their background, language background, or we didn't understand their L1, we wouldn't have a full picture of who we have as our learners in front of us. And it's very important that we communicate that information to our teachers and other peers to help them understand that we're working with emerging bilingual and multilingual students here. And it's not a deficit, and we're going to work through this. And just because their proficiency level may be new or beginner, it does not stop them from trying to acquire the outcomes. If we don't do that, we're going to create bigger gaps. And we don't want to create gaps. We want to make sure that we're supporting them as quickly as possible and closing any gaps that may be there. Any other questions? I hope this has provided you some kind of overview and better understanding of the literacy tool and the language piece that you probably already had, but the Fontes of Manel. My recommendation to all of you, if you have any specific questions, because everyone's coming from a different area or geography area here in Nova Scotia, perhaps you can contact your literacy coach. They're very good, and someone that you need to work with on a regular basis are your math coaches and your literacy coaches. They'll help you with the supporting the academic language that you know that needs to be infused in those classrooms. So they're your go-to people for sure in your education centers. Any other questions? Good? If that's good, then I will say thank you for your time. And if you have any further questions, you know that there will be a follow-up at our provincial PD at the end of November. So you will have an opportunity to ask any more specific, detailed questions. This was more of a follow-up to the overview. And that way, hopefully, you'll have a better understanding. But in the meantime, please try. And like anything, please reach out to your literacy coach. They'll be more than happy to show you and run through a running record with you. And that's one of the best ways to learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonja, for the webinar, and thank you for joining. As Sonja mentioned, you'll get an opportunity to ask more questions at the PD day on November the 30th. So this webinar was recorded, so we'll be putting it onto the Moodle site, and I'll be sending you the link. I wanted to also thank Chris for all the IT support in making this webinar possible, so thank you to Chris as well. Thank you, everyone.
And the disembodied suited arm. So someone's arm was in. Thank you. Have a great day.